Welcome back.
Welcome back. Victoria, you're here. Yes. And just before Victoria takes over and leads us through the next session, I wanted to mention something I forgot to say yesterday, that Victoria is not only a wonderful community weaver and facilitator, but she's also co-executive director of the Young Women Empowered nonprofit organization in Seattle, Washington.
Yes.
Feel free to mention something else, Victoria, if you wish to.
Thank you, Sarah. I think that's fine. I just, we're just thinking about the young people and wanting to really uplift them here and wanting to do that work. And that's the work I'm committed to here in Seattle. And so I just wanted to mention it. But I'm also, speaking of young people, I am here facilitating this conversation with one of our young sages. And Orlando, where are you, my friend?
Right here.
Yes. Would you like to introduce yourself a little bit, Orlando?
Sure. My name is Orlando Villarraga. I was one of the young sages, musician, meditator, poet, and happy to be here, have this conversation with my dear friends, Sara and Daniel Siegel. So I'm excited.
Thank you, Orlando. And I have the great pleasure of introducing Sara Hafa King. And Dr. Sara King is an internationally recognized neuroscientist, political and learning scientist, and thought leader in the interdisciplinary field that merges our understanding of the relationship between contemplative practice, medicine, social justice, education, and public health. It's a great pleasure to be with you today. Carlos?
And Dr. Daniel Siegel is a clinical professor of psychiatry at the UCLA School of Medicine and the founding co-director of the Mindfulness Awareness Research Center at UCLA. He's also the executive director of Mindsight Institute, which focuses on the development of mindsight, which teaches insight, empathy, and integration in individuals, families, and communities. Dr. Siegel has published extensively for both professional and lay audiences and has many bestsellers of the New York Times, such as Mind, A Journey of the Heart of Being Human, Brainstorm, The Power of Purpose of the Teenage Brain, and 2 books with Tina Payne Bryson, The Whole Brain Child and No Drama Discipline. On top of that, Dan Siegel is what I describe a personal, he's like a magician, and he can transmute all kinds of information from many different lenses and angles. And he's wonderful that we'll get to see this today. Dr. Sara King and Daniel Siegel both would like to begin with a compassion meditation to start off our conversation. So I'll pass it on to them.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to gather together today. It is such an honor to be with San family again. Hi, Victoria. Wonderful to meet you. And hi, Orlando. Thank you so much for holding the space and co-hosting here. And yeah, as we were, as Dan and I were just discussing the best entry point into the discussion of Mui, we realized that connecting with the embodied expression of the experience was really the most open and compassionate doorway. So I'm not sure what situation everyone is in who's tuning in today, where you are, where you're sitting or standing, or some of you may even be lying down. But I would love to invite you all now to just move into a place that feels very comfortable and rested, and where you can experience the alignment of your spine and kind of settle in for a grounded, compassion-based practice of the experience of Mui. For some of you, it may feel comfortable to close your eyes for this practice, and for others of you, you may want to direct your gaze slightly in front of the knees or the feet and just maintain a soft gaze and connection with your surroundings. And let's just take a collective set of 3 deep breaths together, tuning into that sacred relationship between the body and the breath. And with each breath, the rising and falling of the chest, you may find yourself feeling a little bit more connected to the place where your body meets with the earth. And if it feels comfortable and compassionate, you may also want to place one hand on your heart, the center where your love and feeling of interconnection emanates from. And then perhaps place the other hand on the belly, the seat of our intuitive mind. And just feeling into the powerful connection between these places and spaces inside of our being. Continuing to direct your awareness back to the breath. I invite you to bring the attention to the belly. And if the belly is being held tight right now, see if you can release it. Allow those muscles to relax into a state of vulnerability and tenderness. And if your hand is over your heart right now, perhaps you're feeling the beats of the heart reverberating like a drum in your chest, the sacred drum of life. Next, bring the attention to the shoulders. The shoulders, as I was once instructed, that carry all of the shoulds, all the things that we think we should be or could be. And I invite you to see if you can relax the shoulders and let go of what you've been holding there. And finally, bringing the attention to the muscles of the face. And I invite you into an exercise that I call releasing the mask. And with each inhale and exhale breath, really tuning into the manner in which the muscles of the face are constantly holding so much expressive emotion for us. And as we become aware increasingly of the masks which we have been conditioned to carry with us to protect us through our lives, this ego self, I invite you to see if you can bring some relaxation to the mask and notice what shows up for you in this letting go. Now noticing the difference between how you're holding yourself in your body, the embrace of your being now, as opposed to how you felt when you entered into this practice. What is the difference? Noticing the quality of the sound in the room. I invite you now, using the power of your imagination, to invoke within your mind a person, place, an object or animal who for you represents a feeling of complete safety and belonging. And bringing this sacred person, animal, object, or place into your mind's eye. Noticing if there's any particular colors that arise in relationship with this love-giving, compassion-supporting entity or place. And allowing that color to flow from the top of the head down through the belly that is now relaxed and held tenderly in our hands, and flowing down through the very bottoms of our feet into the earth, the precious earth, our mother. And as this color of compassion flows from the top of the head down through the bottom of the feet, we bear witness to the experience of ourselves as an individual. There you are. And now I invite you to imagine that this color or colors of compassion that are flowing out from your feet are now forming into an exceptionally strong set of roots that are flowing down from your feet and connecting into the rich, dark soil of the earth, which is full of life. And as you imagine the roots, the very branches of your compassionate existence flowing deep into the earth, I invite you to call into this meditation the 7 generations of your ancestors that flow through your veins, as well as the 7 generations that we so sincerely hope will come after us, who we are prepared to receive on this earth. And know that these ancestors of all of us, as well as those who are to come, they too have their own sacred root system within the earth. And as we breathe in and out the colors of our compassion down, down into our ancestry, as well as our future, I invite you to notice what it feels like when the roots of your individual self touch and meet with the sacred roots of the ancestral realm, as well as the future which we are becoming. Noticing the difference in the body when we intentionally cultivate interconnection between our past, our present, and our future selves. This experience is the experience of Mui, the differentiated individual self in intimate and compassionate interconnection with we. And in this arising of Mui from the very fiber and cells and soul of your being, if it feels comfortable, I invite you to raise your hands, both of your hands up toward your screen, and send the energy of Mui, whatever colors arose for you, send it out from the palms of your hands towards every single being that is here with us gathered today as a community. And feel what you can touch into. Do you feel all of us here together, occupying this sacred territory? And when it feels right, very slowly lowering the hands back down into the lap or to your side, wherever feels comfortable. And as slowly as possible, begin to open up the eyes and allow the colors and textures of the room that you are in to flood into your awareness. Maybe it feels good to slowly rotate the neck and the head around and to look around the room, at your environment, at your surroundings, knowing that you are completely safe and held in this space of we together. Thank you so much for allowing me to guide this offering of the experience of we. I deeply appreciate it.
Thank you for such a wonderful gift. So, Sara, is Dr. Siegel with you right now? Because it seems like I haven't seen him.
Yes, he is here.
And he's unmuted as well. You should
Then can you hear us?
Hi. Thank you, Victoria, for the introduction, and Orlando, great to see you. Sara, what a beautiful, beautiful way to begin our conversation together. And we're really open to the flow of how things go. Orlando and Sara and I, we gather together in a meeting every week, so I'm feeling very interconnected and grounded in terms of what we have been doing for over about a year and a half now. So it's a beautiful moment to share with everyone here our really passions and vision for how things might go for humanity, but also with the planetary pandemic, seeing with all the suffering and the loss of lives and livelihoods, an opportunity actually to reimagine where we might go as a humanity. And I do want to just take a moment, because I haven't done this yet. And Maurizio and Zaya, I want to just thank you, because you had Orlando last year come and give or the year before that, give a wonderful poem. And it was so inspiring to me that I went up to you, Orlando, and then said, hi, you don't know who I am, but I loved your poem, and would you come do the opening panel with me with somebody you don't know, but it would be fun to open it up for our annual meeting, and you agreed. And then I said, you'll be on there with me and with a guy named John Milton, and Orlando actually had spent quite a bit of time with John, and it was just one of these serendipitous things, if such a thing exists, that was resonating. So it was a great thing, and thank you too for bringing Orlando to the SAND meeting, where I was also then able to meet Orlando. And then Sara and I met in another setting, and we hit it off. So it's great to be with friends. So I don't know if you want to just do this as a conversation with questions, or Victoria, what you had in mind for Orlando and Sara and I to do, where we started with this absolutely exquisite, practice, so we could just have silence. That might be the most impactful.
We do have a bit of a flow that it's willing to meander whichever way it needs to be. But when Orlando and I got together and looked at who was presenting, and he said, "Oh, I'd like to introduce them," and I said, "Sure, sure, sure." And then I said, "Orlando, you lead and I'll follow."
Beautiful.
So
Okay.
he's gonna lead and I'll follow.
Yeah.
Sounds great.
Perfect. Hey Dan. Hey Sara. Good to see you.
Orlando.
I think it'd be interesting for just to begin with, for everyone who isn't familiar with the Mui concept, just a little bit of an explanation on what that is and how it originated and how that's woven both of your works together.
Yeah. Great.
Absolutely. I think, Dan, you would be the one to speak most articulately to that vision.
To start with that, yeah. Well, thank you. So I guess the brief notion is, I think being a human being on the planet, I think invites a particular challenge, because especially in modern culture, we're told that we're like a separate self, with the United States being the most individualistic culture. And in anthropology, we have studies of the way what's called self-construal emerges within a culture where you can have a sense of either a separate self, or in their studies, a view of an interdependent self, which is really a way of realizing you are your family or your friends or stuff like that. And it felt to me as a scientist working in a field called interpersonal neurobiology, where we combine all the sciences, from anthropology and sociology and linguistics to psychology and biology, which includes neuroscience and chemistry and physics and math. And we combine them all into one framework. And as a scientist working in that area, but also a clinician working with individuals and schools and communities, it just felt like the constructed experience of a separate self was problematic. And, of course, in the spiritual traditions and wisdom traditions, this has been taught for thousands of years, that to see a self as separate is a big problem. Yet in science, it really isn't addressed, like what's healthy, what's not healthy. So over the course of doing some work on ecological justice and looking at environmental health, it seemed like the mind's construction of a separate, shrunken solo self could be seen as actually the root, that is the cause of environmental destruction. So because of the pressing need of environmental activism, it just felt like, from the interpersonal neurobiology ability to be of service, looking at a way of reformulating identity would be helpful. So I started giving lectures that were called From Me to We. And, it was about this issue of expanding our identity. And one of our online students was at one of those in-person, the days we could meet in person, you remember that, workshops, and she got very agitated. She was very upset. She said, "The title of your talk is so insulting because it implies giving up me to become a we." Yeah. So I said, "Oh my God, you're right." She goes, "Well, isn't it important that I sleep well?" And I said, "Yes, of course." She goes, "Well, that's me sleeping." I said, "Yes." "Isn't it important I exercise this body?" "Yes, yes, that's me," she said. I said, "Yeah, that's you." "Shouldn't I enjoy my body, know my body's history, both culturally and racially, and its situatedness within the larger culture, and also know what my attachment experiences were?" I said, "Absolutely." She goes, "Well, that's all me." I said, "Of course that's you." She said, "But your title says get rid of that to become a we." So she said, that's not right. And I said, "You know something, you are absolutely correct." She said, "Well, come up with something else." So I said, "All right, how about not only the limited me, but in addition have the interconnected we?" And she goes, "Yeah, but that is so clunky. Come up with something else." So in our field, we have a fundamental mechanism of health. We try to define the mind and offer a view of consciousness and stuff like that. That's a long story, but the mechanism that we define as mental health is a process called integration, which we define as differentiated parts of a system are able to be distinct, and then they come together and become linked. So we use the linguistic term integration for that balancing of differentiation and linkage. And so what I said to her was, I said, if you're really going to integrate identity, you're absolutely right. It's not me to we. It would be me plus we equals we, I said to her, and she got this big smile on her face. And it was this exciting moment that I then started incorporating into teachings and practices. And it's a weird word, we, but what's nice about it is it allows you to kind of get a shock of your, the way the mind constructs reality is it has these categories it makes, like me versus you, and then concepts of self and other, and then linguistic terms like here I am and there you are, or even the word self is a big problem. And, I've had big discussions with Kristen Neff and Chris Germer about their use of the word self-compassion, which I understand is really important, but I'd rather that they use the word inner compassion, because when you have compassion for what you call the other, whether that other is a human being or a forest, the other is you. And so to keep on reinforcing the lie of a separate self with a word like self that implies it's in your body, or even worse, it's in your head, is a linguistic problem. And the way this layering works is once you start using words, it goes back and reinforces the concepts and the categories that are beneath the surface of consciousness. So what we have done, inviting, some folks in to have this deep discussion, Sara and Orlando are part of this group. And now we have this meeting that happens every week, and a growing community that's a we community that was started just a couple of weeks ago, and I welcome you all to join. It's been fascinating. The we community is really about saying, how can the future of humanity take the vulnerability of the human brain to make a self-construal of culturally shaped, attachment shaped, school shaped certainty as a separate self, and to live with that flimsy fantasy of certainty embedded in the linguistic term I or me. And I think it resonates. If Rupert Spira were on here, I was listening to his beautiful words earlier, it'd be really interesting to have Rupert on here and see how he feels about this. This is a scientific view of saying integration is health, that experience is based on energy and information flow, and that we've gotten in trouble as a humanity of becoming too differentiated from nature, too differentiated across these mentally constructed divisions we call race, and marginalizing people by in-group, out-group distinctions that have been with us as mammals and especially as primates for at least 50 million years. So we have a lot of work to do, but consciousness can rise above these evolutionarily determined vulnerabilities of the human brain to make up things like I and me, different from you and them, and then create destruction, socially, because social injustice and environmental injustice are all based on ignoring the reality of interconnection. And once you drop into, this practice that we do, the Wheel of Awareness, and please come join the PEP community because we're now getting deep into it, you start coming to view the origin of consciousness as being what the physicists would call the sea of potential, this quantum vacuum. What in our diagram we call it a plane of possibility. And when people do the Wheel of Awareness practice, they put awareness in the hub of the wheel, what you're aware of on the rim. And when people, even who have no meditation experience, drop into that hub, pure awareness, the sense of a separation dissolves. It isn't that the body disappears, it's that you have me plus we equals we, and then you're able to see that experience is the flow of energy and information. Sometimes there's an I that comes up, sometimes that's lost in the we, but you're able to have both and hold both in what feels like they're opposites. But when you realize the skull and skin are not impermeable boundaries, from which energy information flows, you realize you are that flow. So when Sara, you did that absolutely exquisite meditation with us just earlier, you come to realize that that dark soil you refer to, that is your body. That the trees around us are our body. That all of us on this call right now are each other, are each other. You know, you can have fun words like that. So we're collecting the word "we" in every language on this planet, so that we can collectively, you know, find this movement toward a more integrative way of living on Earth. And Sara and Orlando, please.
Yeah. Beautiful, beautiful. Yeah, Sara, would you like to add anything to that, or what's been your experience working in collaboration with Mr. Siegel?
Yes, thank you so much for asking. That was such a wonderful explanation, Dan. And, you know, I think that the only thing that I would really love to add, because Dan brought up this concept of social justice, and social justice is something that I'm incredibly passionate about, but it really wasn't until I encountered Dan's framework of interpersonal neurobiology that I came to understand that for me, I have a framework that Dan and I have been in discussion about for quite some time now that I call the science of social justice. And I realized that there were so many different misconceptions around social justice where people thought, oh, you know, social justice is about rioting in the streets. Social justice is about disorder. Social justice is about people who are angry and who are disgruntled and who are, you know, there was like a connotation of violence that had been attached to it. But when we look at the meaning of integration, we actually discover that social justice and well-being are one and the same thing. And when we ground the conversation around discovering what social justice is about within the context of well-being, then we realize that all of the different academic disciplines that Dan was naming, there's an interdisciplinary manner in which we can explore the manner in which the individual traumas that play out inside of our bodies are also completely interconnected to this state of collective trauma and dissociation from our bodies. And the manner in which this lie of the separate self plays out such that we're living within this incredible scarcity mentality. And we're living from a nervous system place of survival, needing for the I to survive, and being so incredibly attached to this I surviving that we as a society have in some senses become really numb and have I almost want to call it like that. I have been sensing something of a death of compassion, of true compassion, right? It's exactly what Dan was pointing out. When the compassion that you feel within your being is only limited to this I, then the compassion that you're capable of feeling will only be extended to other I's in the world who look and feel and act like me. And that's a fundamental limitation of the way in which we have been viewing compassion, and also the way in which we have been viewing health, the health of ourselves and the health of our societies, and the manner in which justice truly is love in action, grounded in well-being.
Thank you, Sara. I think that's something I've noticed in my time with both of you, that how much you complement each other in the work, and seeing you both as a sort of thought leaders and revolutionaries in your field. I'm wondering if you guys could speak about in this time in particular with the crisis that we're facing right now, because we've been talking about the Mui concept for a while, and now it almost seems more relevant than ever with all the sort of different whole variety of the spectrum of experience that we're feeling as a community now. So I'd love if you guys could give us some of the thoughts on how does Mui play out right now during this time.
Yeah, thank you, Orlando. Sara, do you want to take that on first, or?
Yeah, I did have just an initial thought, Dan, and then maybe you might have some sort of reflection on that. But I wanted to return just in terms of this exploration of me and the embodied feeling of it. I wanted to bring into the conversation the reality that that othering is a disease. And othering is, I think that there's kind of a misconception that we are taught to other one another because of the societies that we are living in. But I really have this notion from interpersonal neurobiology that othering as a phenomenon actually is rising from within us, from within the experience of the dysregulated and numbed nervous system. And so the potential that I think that Mui really has as an embodied practice and as a means of engaging in the world is that as we focus in on the embodiment of Mui, we can come to detect on very fine and subtle levels the ways in which othering and thus pushing people away and the violence that occurs through this othering arises firstly inside of ourselves. And when we know that, then we can bring our contemplative practices, we can bring our healing arts, we can bring our love and our compassion, this inner feeling of compassion to hold othering. It's not that we want to demonize the fact that othering occurs, but we want to cultivate a kind of embodied awareness around it so that when it arises and we hold it close to ourselves. I loved what Rupert Spira was saying about holding the tough emotions like grief and like sadness close to us like a friend. And when we can hold this act of othering towards ourselves, then I believe that interconnection and belonging lie on the other side. And that those two will arise organically from our nervous systems with this engagement with Mui.
Beautiful. Let's just sit with that for several moments. I would just say absolutely, and build on some of the components of what you just said, Sara, to just establish a kind of framework that may not even be needed, but that might just make a foundation that would be helpful in our discussion. Just building on exactly what Sara said and remembering the poem that you read, Orlando, back at that meeting. And I'll just underscore it with this moment in human evolution, and just to clarify that, we do have something called genetic evolution, where mutations happen, and over a long period of time, the way that genetic alteration, which is usually random, happens, and then the way you can survive more, for whether you're cooperating or competing, whatever it is, that's genetic evolution. There is something called cultural evolution, which is quite distinct. And what it involves in a much more rapid form is the way in which energy and information flow is embedded within our patterns of communication that can happen literally within a very short period of time. So what we're saying, or we are saying, is that, as gets to your point, Orlando, about this moment of the pandemic, all of humanity, for the most part, came to a halt in business as usual. And it's possible that we might go back to business as usual. Very possible. You know, we can talk about the economics of that, the politics of that, the psychology of that, the sociology of that, the anthropology of that. But it's very possible that could happen. However, there is this process called cultural evolution, where a moment of disruption and disorganization can actually take a system that was kind of getting mired in its own production consumption cycle of a separate self accumulating stuff. Let's just summarize it that way. And that the meaning of life is how much stuff you have. That was putting us on a pathway that scientists suggest within 30 years will lead to profound environmental destruction and billions of human beings dying. So that's a kind of long-term pandemic, if you will, a long-term threat that the human mind, having evolved to deal with immediate threats, doesn't know how to deal with a long-term threat, even though 30 years is not that long-term. So if you think of the example of the frog that you may know about, you know, the pandemic is like the boiling water, and you throw a frog into a boiling water, it jumps out because it says, wow, that's too hot. That's like a virus, it's killing people, let's drop the curve, fine, we do that. We all stop, no one's flying in airplanes, blah, blah, blah. But the environmental destruction that's happening, or the social injustice that's existed, is like this long-term thing. And it's like taking that frog, putting it in the same pot of room temperature water, but then turning up the heat so it slowly boils, slowly boils. The frog doesn't jump out. It just dies. This is the evolutionary, biological evolutionary reality. Number one, we only look at acute stresses. We can't really deal with long-term threats. Number two, we have an in-group, out-group distinction that the human brain makes that's built on 50 million years of primate history, it looks like. 50 million years, right? So now we're in this moment for the first time, and if you read whether it's Diane Ackerman's book, The Anthropocene Era, The Human Age, or the beautiful book about Joanna Macy called, it's right there, A Wild Love for the World, you know, or Paul Hawkins' book, Drawdown. These are books you might draw upon. But what we're at this moment is to say that the biological, genetic, evolutionary pathway of the human nervous system is to have these categories that are then building concepts that come out as linguistic symbols. And modern culture, now East and West, modern culture is emphasizing, with all those three layers, a separate self, self versus other, humans versus nature, white versus black, you know, self literally versus other. And so the problem is, because of the way culture works, you grow up in a family and your parents tell you, your other attachment figures tell you you're separate. You're Victoria, you're Orlando, you're Sara, I'm Dan, you know, and then we believe it. And then you go to school, and then you have to be certain about what you say as Victoria, or what you do on your test, Orlando, or the essay you write, Sara, and all this stuff, you know. And then what we have is the layer of awareness is convinced of these categories, concepts that's not even aware of, and linguistic terms that you see all your friends are calling you Orlando. So you must be Orlando. They're calling you Sara. You must be Sara. Right? And so you don't even doubt it. Now, whether you're looking at, let's say, E.O. Wilson, who's a biologist who wrote a book called The Meaning of Human Existence, and him pointing out that humanity uses primarily sight and hearing, and those give you the biological illusion of separation, because you can't see the deep ways we're interconnected. So biologically, we're vulnerable. Or take the physics view, that there's a long story about this, but to give you the quick summary, that in the macro state world of large objects, there is a view of things being like nouns. They're like entities that are separated. Yet when you get down to smaller things, let's call them things just for a moment, they're actually probability fields, which is what energy is the movement from possibility to actuality across a series of probabilities. These probability fields, like an electron or a photon, they don't get governed by the same classical, what Sir Isaac Newton discovered, so they're called Newtonian macrostate world of nouns. Instead, in the microstate world, things are events. They're not even entities like things, they're verbs, and they're deeply interconnected. So whether it's the biological vulnerability or the physics vulnerability, that we are all born in a macrostate body, we get the false perception called an illusion, or even Einstein called it a delusion, a false belief, a psychotic belief. So whether it's a false perception or a false belief, a delusion, we're really on the wrong track. Now, human consciousness has the capacity to intentionally move cultural evolution in a different direction. And so what we're trying to say in our feeling or idea or whatever you want to call it, is that at this moment, especially with the pandemic disruption, we have an opportunity to identify the psychotic belief, to identify the false perception, whether it's biological or physics. We got two vulnerabilities, and say, let's strengthen ourselves so we see life clearly as it is, which is interconnection is reality. And so we open awareness to that. But if you're taught to be a linear thinker and not a systems thinker, you think this is goofy, what we're saying. So as a scientist, and I work in systems work, the linear scientists, they will roll their eyes and say, nothing of what you're saying has any scientific merit. And as linear thinkers, they just look, A goes to B, goes to C, goes to D. So a system science looks at the issue like Sara is beautifully talking about, the science of social justice or the science of environmental justice, and says, look, we're going to constantly test and try to disprove everything we say. But once you do it this way, which is what we try to do in interpersonal neurobiology, it's like for the 3rd edition, I had 18 interns working with me to try to disprove what was said in that book, which will be out soon. And Sara helped me finish the final placements of all the references. But what you'll see then is a scientifically grounded view that links science to subjective experience, to spirituality, meaning living a life of meaning and connection, and to how we can be of service to humanity and to life on earth. And so this is where, it's a call to action that needs all of us in the tent, not, saying this way is better, that way better. No, we can look at how cultural evolution is going to need something called pervasive leadership. Every human being can be empowered with knowledge. Just like Louis Pasteur says, chance favors the prepared mind, to prepare each other's minds with this deep scientific understanding, and then we can move forward in a more integrated, harmonious way. Hence the cup.
Harmony. Yes, yes, yes. Thank you so much. Wow. It's like loving it, loving it. Mind is blown. Thank you so much. Because it's definitely just putting all the pieces together of what we've been listening to from the day we opened yesterday, in terms of some of Bio's speaking, when he says, times are urgent, let's just slow down. It's really slowing down so that we can catch up, right? So that we can look at what is our chaotic beliefs that is having us paving the road over, the bodies, and so that we cannot see it, right? Or Stan Rushworth was speaking about time. I want to introduce time into this conversation too, because we do have this moment where we can have some time to reflect, but also how our perception of time is also intertwined in this, in the sense that when things happen in the past, like say the 1400, 1500, 1800s, and people are still living with the consequences of that, then wanting to bring it to saying we need to deal with this in this present moment. Speak to us a little bit about time. And Sara, please jump in here in terms of your, when you're speaking about the science of social justice. How does the science of social justice take time into account?
Wow. I mean, I think that that is such a fantastic question. And my most immediate response is there's a movement happening right now. And of course, in our technological age, most movements, or I would say all movements, have their accompanying hashtag. So a hashtag that you all might be familiar with is, you'll see the hashtag say her name, or say their name, say his name. And what these hashtags are referring to are, just within the past 3 or 4 months that we've been experiencing this pandemic, there have been a series of killings in the United States of unarmed African American people. One of them that comes to mind is a young woman named Breonna Taylor, who was literally executed in her home by the police as she was sleeping. The other name that I want to say, we want to say her name is Breonna Taylor. The other name that I want to say is Ahmaud Bremby. He was the young African-American man who was going for a jog in his neighborhood in Georgia when 2 white men pulled up on him in their truck and shot him. Now, these are 2 individuals who perished violently at a time, and I can't underscore this more. You really have to, it really boggles the mind that we could be in the midst of the most urgent collective catastrophe that we have ever experienced, and yet the hatred and the suffering, which has been so part and parcel of the human experience, so part and parcel of the experience of living in the United States, this hatred is something which has been traveling with us along the temporal continuum. And it began with the genocide of the indigenous peoples in this country and the enslavement, the transatlantic slave trade, this hatred, this othering, this literal, by law, dehumanization has been traveling with us in our bodies, in our cells, in our very breath. It has become this collective resonance and vibration that is calling out from the very soil that we walk upon. And it has never gone anywhere. So when I connect this idea of temporality to movements for social justice, the call for social justice is a call for the fact that we are all, in that we are born deserving of living in a society that fully supports every single aspect of our spiritual, mental, emotional, and physical health and well-being. And any action which is rooted in the lie of the separate self, and thus gives rise to hatred, to suffering, to greed, is fundamentally going to tear at that fabric of well-being. And so until we develop the kinds of practices, and what I think is so powerful about Mui is that not only is it a practice, it is an orienting around an identity such that when I see you suffering, I know that to be my suffering. When I see someone who does not have well-being, then I cannot therefore have well-being for myself. There has to be a completely collectivist holding of our capacity to offer healing to one another, irrespective of the place on the earth that we come from, our nationality, our immigration status, our gender identity, our religious expression, all of the beautiful multiplicities of the ways in which our identities express one another have to be honored as our individuated selves. But then we also have to discover how to link them together in a collective capacity such that we know, and also to extend this into the earth, such that we know that if the earth is suffering, then we will continue to suffer ourselves. And the way in which time is holding all of this is that time is precious. Time is precious to us as finite beings. And so there is a certain urgency with which we have to act.
I would just,
Thank you. Dan, would you like to add anything to that?
yeah, very, very, very briefly, again, just soaking in the incredible wisdom you're sharing with us, Sara, and to really build on this incredible vision you have of the science of social justice with one small little interesting scientific fact. In that classical Newtonian macro state world of big things, there's something called an arrow of time. And this is, Victoria, to get to your question about time. Mm-hmm. And the arrow of time, while it isn't something that's like flowing per se, like a river or something, even though we may feel it that way and poetically say it like that, but it's basically what's called the second law of thermodynamics, which says that there's a directionality to change. And we call it the arrow of time. And probably when we collectively have a linguistic term like time, and you beautifully say, time is limited, and time is running out, or I'm out of time, or all this kind of stuff, it's probably referring to the awareness of the arrow of time in the macro state world. Now, that becomes very important for a couple of reasons, but one is to say that in the micro state quantum world, there is no arrow of time. So the verb-like events do not have a directionality of change. And when you drop into the hub of the wheel and the wheel of awareness practice, that's a very common experience. And we saw in our community, we did a poll, we got about an 80 to 85% hit that people feel timelessness and other things like that. And that's probably because when you enter pure awareness, you're entering the micro state quantum realm. Just like you have a water realm and an air realm, we have two realms of one reality. The reason this becomes important is because modern culture, I think, lends people to live in these macro state bodies. And we have words like self and other, where, especially under threat, people can dehumanize what they call the other, treat the other like a piece of dirt, and stick that now dehumanized object into the trash bin with genocide. We've been doing genocide for a long, long time as primates. And we've done it in humanity forever. So this is not new, and it's horrible, and it's a human reality. So some people shrugged their shoulders and said, let's give it up. Humans are impossible, forget it. Now that's one path. And then just go out and get a gas guzzling car and have a great time, whatever, in quotes. But another path is to say, human beings are amazing. We do have a vulnerability to think we're only macro state conditions, that there is something called time, and that, we believe in that noun-like view that if I'm here in 2020, I'm not related to what happened 400 years ago when individuals were kidnapped from their home in Africa. So what does that have to do with me? Because I'm here now. I'm in the present moment. I'm here now. Don't give me that stuff. In a macro state way, you can nounify things and just say, I'm here now. It's not connected to what you're saying. I don't relate to it or something like that. Someone might say from a macro state view. And they would say, you know, the worst genocide in the world was the European destruction of native peoples here in North America. And we haven't had any reparations for that, really. You know, so, and when you see how native peoples are dying from COVID now, it's just horrendous. And what you said is so powerful, Sara. I'll just say this from the science point of view, then part of, in terms of cultural evolution, would be to give people practices where they can access the pure awareness state. We call it the plane of possibility, beneath what we call plateaus and peaks of categories and concepts and linguistic terms that are nounifying the lie of the separate self, so much so it looks like it's real, that separation, or that, you know, being purple is better than being orange or something like that, you know, and then kill the orange people, you know. So what we need to do then is give people access to the pure awareness state, which is actually doable. I did this in a parliament once where they're having lots of fights about immigration, and we did the wheel of awareness when a parliamentarian who never meditated before got into the hub in a 25-minute practice. He came to me during the break and said, I've never felt so much love or so connected to everyone and everything. And he's crying, you know. So it is just right there, because the quantum realm surrounds us all the time. It's the foundation, actually, of the Newtonian classical macro state realm. So what we need to do is let go of what a beautiful artist wrote that's on the entryway of the Brooklyn Library. It says, having abandoned the flimsy fantasy of certainty, I decided to wander. And human cultural evolution needs to be empowered with this pervasive leadership to wander away from the lie of the separate self that's been leading to genocide and social injustice. It leads to environmental destruction. And when you drop into pure awareness, this quantum state, the plane of possibility, new possibilities arise. And not only do they arise, but the reality of interconnection is a felt experience. It's not something you just read in a book or read in a poem or heard in a song. All those are important ways. Don't get me wrong. Orlando, keep on writing your poems. Let's keep on having music that does this. So those are really important. And people have to have the direct felt experience from those poems, from those songs, and from practice that is just a focus attention away from becoming what humanity can become. And if we start a new culture, what do you call it, Mui, or whatever you call it, the idea is the reality of interconnection and the integration of identity. What emerges from that is compassion and kindness. They're the natural outcome of integration. And that's the kind of world that Mui can create.
Yum.
What an incredible tapestry you three weave together and bring all the layers and the levels and the perspectives. And this conversation really feels, I know you two were not there yesterday, but you completely brought what we discussed yesterday today into a whole different level and weaved it all together. So thank you for this incredible gift. And we would like to take, we have probably 6-7 minutes for questions. So maybe we bring 1 or 2 questions in, if that's okay with you. Yeah.
Sure.
Sounds good.
So
Donald.
Donald
You're-
McLeod.
Yes.
Yes.
Hi, Donald.
I use this speech synthesizer because I am speech disabled due to a brain injury, but I can understand everything you say. I am a lot like Stephen Hawking was, except I am smarter. You may know of Drive. Jacqueline Chisburn, who devised a neurofeedback methodology that helped others.
I'm sorry, but not right. Hold on, please.
You may know of Dr. Jacqueline Gisburn, who devised a neurofeedback methodology that helped others with a neurological condition. I unfortunately was not helped by the method, but it had inspired me to investigate how it worked. I learned that her method combined quantum physics with the eradication of troubling memories which stem from glial cells. By doing so, it had healed the problem with the condition from which the patient had suffered. Have you heard of this, and if so, have you studied this phenomenon?
I haven't personally. No.
No, and I have not either, but it's a very inspiring question you're asking. Thank you, Donald, for the question, because the idea of using creative ways with feedback and other methodologies to use the mind, which includes attention, awareness, and intention, to actually go into some of the neural networks that may be involved with trauma in all sorts of ways. In the developing mind, there's a whole chapter about just this very question, a whole chapter on memory and trauma. And so I think what is really inspiring about you and about your question is the notion that we can use the mind to actually change both the function and the structure of the brain. When we started talking like that about 30 years ago, people thought, well, they thought we were out of our minds. But it turns out that that statement, the mind can change the structure and function of the brain, it's about neuroplasticity for sure, but even more than neuroplasticity, it says that mental life, the flow of energy and information in our view, can be used in a very productive way to change things like traumatic ways that get embedded in the brain. So thank you. And if you're not familiar with a book by a colleague of mine, Norman Doidge, it would be great. Yeah, the two books, you know Norman's two books.
Yes.
Yeah.
I saw him in Chicago years ago with you.
With me, yes, good. Well, you looked familiar, Donald. So it's great to see you again. And what Norman and I tried to do is combine, you know, the explorations that Norman has beautifully done in the brain that changes itself and the brain's way of healing, Doidge, D-O-I-D-G-E, with some of the work I do on integration and interpersonal neurobiology. So it's great to see you again. And that was really a fun time together to really try to think deeply about how we could do these things. So great to see you again, Donald. Really nice.
Thank you.
Thank you, Donald.
Thank you, Donald. Thank you, Dan. The next question is from Debbie Loyacono. Debbie, can you unmute yourself? I cannot find you otherwise.
Hi. I'm the little lamb over here. Sorry, a little brown. I don't show my picture because I cry a lot. Because a lot of
we love tears. We love tears.
We're all looking at this big sobbing person. But question for Dr. Siegel. I've been following your work for years and years and read all your books. And one of the things that I followed a long time ago was when you were talking about the science of compassion and mirror neurons and so forth and so on. And I was wondering, because I've kind of been out of it for a while, are there any new medical discoveries or practices that really excite you around the biochemistry of compassion or the neurobiology of compassion and the bonding, like what happens to the brain? Why do people bond on MDMA? What's oxytocin doing out there? And are there any new transmitter substances? Anything that you think would be like the latest that really excites you?
Yeah. Well, Debbie, thank you for the question. And I don't know, Sara, if you want to comment on anything then, and then I'll dive into something.
Well, the only thing that, and thank you so much for offering that, the main thing that I find to be really inspiring in this moment is some of the research that's coming up around mindfulness practices and self-compassion within the mindfulness practice, and the impact that that has on a genetic level on the expression of telomerase. And also some of the research that is showing that not only does mindfulness training have this impact on the telomeres, whereas they can slow down the shortening or the aging process that occurs on a cellular level, but that in tandem, these studies have been done with groups of marginalized individuals in the United States, and demonstrate that simultaneously the experience of internalized discrimination is also lessened at the same time. And so what this shows is that this cultivation of inner compassion, to me, has the potential to not only produce healthier bodies, but also bodies that are healing from intergenerational trauma.
Beautiful. So powerful. Thank you, Sara. And I would, build on the framework, and Debbie, this gets to your, questioning in terms of the compassion and the empathy and stuff. There's a lot of really exciting new research coming in that basically shows that if you can cultivate this capacity, as Sara is beautifully talking about, to not only feel another person's feelings. So let's just do a quick outline of this. Empathy has at least 5 aspects to it. You can feel another person's feelings, which is often how some research papers will just define empathy that way, but they leave out the other elements. And 4 other elements, among even more, are to actually take the perspective of another person, to understand the inner psychology of another person, to take joy in another person's happiness and success, called empathic joy, and then to have empathic concern, which is when you feel the suffering of another, you then engage compassion. Now, when the researchers only look at empathy as emotional resonance, this is what they find. They find if you resonate too much, and they don't use the following language, but we can, when you over-identify with the emotional state of another person, let's say they're suffering, you lose integration in our view. In the researchers' view, they would say you become empathically flooded, and they would use terms like empathic distress and empathic burnout. For our point of view, it's actually over-identification and a loss of differentiation. So there's too much linkage without differentiation. So you lose your integrated flow and you move either to chaos or rigidity. That's our view of what they're talking about. They don't talk like that. But if you compare just that process in brain scan studies to then taking empathic concern and activating compassion itself, which has 3 parts. Compassion, and Paul Gilbert writes about this exquisitely, it's sensing another person's suffering, number 1. It's then imagining what you might do to reduce the suffering of, I don't want to use the word other, but whether it's inner suffering or the suffering of the human being not born into the body you were born into, however you want to say that, you imagine what you might do. That's number 2. So sensing it, number 1. Using your intellect. So there's nothing wrong with intellect. Saying, what can I do to be of service? And then doing something, even if it's holding someone's hand and, bearing witness. There's lots of ways of being of service. So sensing, imagining with your intellect, thinking about it. What can you do to help? And then helping. So now what the research that comes out of Germany and that's coming out of different labs in the United States on terms of the brain is that the networks of compassion are somewhat distinct. So they're differentiatable from the networks of empathy, at least for emotional resonance. Now, when I was teaching in Berlin with Tanya Singer, who did the earliest research in this work, and we were teaching together on the panel, I said, Tanya, people are saying that empathy is bad and compassion is good. And she goes, what do you mean? And I said, well, that's how they're quoting you. She goes, they're misquoting me. That's not what I said at all. And I said to her, can you have compassion without empathy? And she said, maybe in 2% of the population that live in Tibet, where they've been maybe meditating for 40 years on this, they've learned how to just be compassionate without the empathy circuits. But for 98% of us, she said, you've got to have empathy to have compassion. So I just want to point out that that's really exciting. And we can teach this. So we're doing a bunch of things with our Mindsight Institute for first line medical responders, teaching them how to not become burnt out by allowing them to create, as our view would be, access to that plane of possibility. So when emotional resonance arises as a point on the rim, just like the Rumi poem, The Guest House, you invite it in. You know, I know Rupert mentioned this too. This is what we see the plane of possibility being. And amazingly, what emerges in doing this with literally tens of thousands of people in person and getting their response, amazingly, the pure awareness, that hub, the plane of possibility, involves awareness, of course, that's how we're defining it, interconnection, and love. And so when you look at the neural correlates of that, it looks like when you can drop yourself into this more spacious way, literally of neural correlates of brain firing, then you are giving yourself the resource to allow the suffering of the world to be present, to allow the grief about that to be present, to connect with human beings that aren't the same skin color as you, or religion as you, or nationality as you, and realize they are you, to see that the forest around you is your body. And then the upsetting quality that may emerge, you stay present with it. And then you can imagine how to help and be of help. And this is where I think the neuroscience is so exciting, because when you correlate it with this 3P perspective of getting down this plane of possibility, basically, giving people that resource, it allows interconnection, awareness, presence, and love to be the natural outcome of those kinds of practices. So I think we're at an amazingly exciting time to bring all that together. And when you think about, you know, the wisdom of spiritual traditions for generations and generations, the wisdom of indigenous peoples for generations, and then the role that science can play to join in that conversation that's been going on for thousands of years. This isn't to replace it. It's just to build this integrated humanity that takes us to the next step of cultural evolution.
Wow. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you both so much. You know, unfortunately, the time is just pushing us to have to end this. But before we go, one or two words that describe your partnership. If you could just say those two, that would be wonderful to close us out. Sara, Dr. Sara King, what is this partnership working with Dr. Siegel?
I would use the word transcendent, and I would use the word family.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Dr. Siegel, how is it to work with Dr. King?
Yeah, I would say it's resonance and joy and love, if I can get a third word in there.
I love you too.
Orlando and everyone in this.
I know.
Thank you.
Thank you for all the work you're doing in the world, Orlando. Thank you. Thank you.
Orlando, thank you, Victoria, Mauricio, Zaya.
We just one word I want to say. You today, you really define yet once more and embodied what science and non-duality is.
The original vision.
The original vision.
We carry it
this
in
is
our hearts.
Exactly.
You both are fully embodying it.
It's so beautiful.
Transmitting.
Yes. Oh. And I want to say to everyone that's on the line, please go and study with these two masters, because they're just, we need this. We need them. We need them.
We.
Thank you for having us.